$700,000 and $900,000 more in revenue than what was budgeted. So that's going to roll over into the fund balance, which means that the B Roads fund balance is probably going to be, coming up to near where the general fund's fund balance is by next year. But of course, the road project's very expensive, and road equipment's very expensive. And since we just virtually defunded the Transportation Special Service District, that means that the entire burden of road projects is going to be on this fund. So this one right here, the restaurant and car rental tax, does have a fund balance, opening fund balance 2018 of $282,000. That's money that is not obligated at this point for anything, and so we could draw that out of the fund balance for next year and use it, just keeping in mind that it's one-time money. This is accumulated over the years as a result of more revenue coming in than we budgeted for, because we generally try to be a little conservative with our revenue projections, just so that we don't end up going over budget or not having enough money to cover our expenses.
And we should have more money coming in, $80,000 a year, because we budgeted that percentage.
Yeah. And so, I tried to account for that in my projections for next year. And so I reviewed the collections that we've been bringing in, and I would say that on the car rental tax portion, which is the only part that we increased, not the restaurant tax portion, that the new component is bringing in, when I reviewed it, 93% of the old component. So it's almost doubling that part of it. So that's good. And so this year they're probably, likely have to revise when we do the modified budget, increase the revenue line item, because the council has made decisions based on that increase, particularly with regard to the airport, budget amendments out at the airport. So, I'm not sure that we'll exactly have the money to contribute to this fund balance next year. We'll see, but some of that has already been soaked up in budget amendments over the course of this year. The travel council started off with almost $322,000 in their fund balance, which is actually a little, somewhat less than I'd like to see. The travel council has a lot of expenses in the first quarter, but no revenue. And so there's a big cash flow issue for them. And so I like, my goal for the travel council is often to see about $500,000 in their fund balance, just strictly for cash flow purposes. So it's a little lower than it has been in the past, I think. I mean, it's still something, but I would almost recommend the travel council budget to put more in there to bring it up. In these grant funds, we've got some balances in there that are relatable to unspent money from grants. Miscellaneous grants has a whole bunch of different things. Part of which, go ahead.
I'm sorry, back on domestic violence grant. So my understanding was that pass-through money reimbursement. You apply for the grant, you spend the money, then you reimburse. So is that really a true? We haven't had a DV victim in the sheriff's office for a few years, so I can't imagine that's real money.
Well, it's got to be real money if it's in there, but
that's not the way that grant works.
I'd have to check. I mean,
they may have a deal with the sheriff's office that they let them keep balance, but they don't let anybody else do that.
No, but there's, I suppose, a variety of reasons why the money would be in there. Again, I'd have to check with Diane and see. It's kind of just been lingering there. In some cases, for instance, with some of these balances, they've been county contributions to whatever's going on. that didn't get spent. So it could be that. That's happened, for instance, with the Umtra Fund, this Atlas Tailings Pile Fund. Some money was put in there. What was it, like 2006 or 7, something like that, to hire a lobbyist to go to DC. Nine, somewhere around. Whenever it was that there was, Joette went to DC and also hired a lobbyist. So not all of that money that we contributed to that fund was spent, and that's actually how we paid for Mary's trip. Not out of the actual grant funds, which are not allowed, but out of the funds that we put in there to cover the lobbyists that were left over. And so researching, it takes some research to figure out what this money is in the domestic violence grant. The miscellaneous grants, there's some funds in there, like for instance, we had we got $65,000 from, I believe, the state a long time ago, 25 years or more ago, to finish surveying the township corners in the county. And the job's just never been done, and so that $65,000 just keeps carrying over and over. And I actually talked with Lucas Blake, the guy who's running for surveyor, about actually completing that job, and so I'd love to spend some of that down. But there are similar other circumstances in there where there's grant monies that have come in, but it's really all obligated to whatever the particular grant is. Some of it's the weed department carryover, various other things. At some point, I'd like to actually specifically go over the grants, but again, just sort of waiting on the opportunity to go with Diana on that, because it's all just in her head. And they're very complicated. Probably some of the most complicated things to deal with are the grants that the county gets, because they all have their own unique requirements and limitations and restrictions on how the money can be spent. Sometimes the money comes in and then you spend it. Sometimes you spend the money first and then you get reimbursed. And it's just every single one of them has a different set of rules and purpose. Yeah, and so it's that's probably one of the most confusing things for me to try to figure out, is all the different grants that the county is administering. In Fund 26, the TRT, which is the non-promotional portion of the TRT, there's also a fund balance of about $215,000. And again, that money, there's no purpose for that money necessarily to be sitting in a fund balance. It's the same with the balance on the restaurant and car rental tax. But considering that this is built up over time, you have to just remember that if you pull it out and put it somewhere, that it's just one-time money, and it'll take quite a while to build something like that back up over the years. And so it is something that we could use to help balance our budget. You just have to remember that it's not ongoing revenue, and so if you're putting it toward ongoing expenses, you just got to be aware that the year afterward you're going to be $500,000 short on revenue for covering ongoing expenses. In designated funds, this is where we've got the buildup of several different, it's kind of like where we put money if we want to save it up, so to speak. This is where we put our trail maintenance funds. And so every year we put money into it, and it builds up, and then when we need to make the expenditure, we have something to draw from there. And that's also another fund that I'd like to go over in detail at some point on an agenda. Just go over all these different funds and where we're at. This is obligated. This is money that's obligated to a specific purpose, and so you can't just take that money necessarily and use it however you want. or you shouldn't anyway. I suppose you could, but you know, it was put in there for a specific purpose. And we should probably set an agenda item to go over that too.
What are some examples in there?
The trail fund is one of the big ones. USU set aside. So between those two, that's probably the 95% of it is that $525,000 for USU that we haven't paid out, and then whatever is in there for the trail maintenance. I would say that accounts for the majority of it.
Okay.
Do we have contributions scheduled into that fund? Is it?
We do for trails, but I'm trying to think if we're putting anything else in there. I think trail maintenance is the only thing I can think of off the top of my head that we budgeted to contribute to for next year. And I'm thinking that probably what we'll do, if the council approves a budget for trail mix, that will create a fund and actually transfer those trail maintenance funds over to that fund that trail mix exists in, which I'm thinking we should call Parks, Trails, and Recreation or something, just anticipating a broader scope in the future. And then the money that's in the trail maintenance fund, or the designated fund for trail maintenance, will transfer over to that fund. But this is a fund that's, like I say, if the council has a desire to save up money for something in particular, like trail maintenance or whatever, that's not what you would consider a capital project necessarily, that would be the kind of thing that you would use, or the fund that we would use. Next up is our impact fee.
Sorry, and then
Oh,
that USU you had mentioned, is that like the road project? Is that where that would come out of, or is that a separate?
The infrastructure.
Yeah.
So we saved up over the years a $525,000 contribution to that, and that was committed actually when the city agreed to go to the CIB to get the full loan. We didn't come out as well as we hoped to.
From CIB.
From CIB when we went, and ended up still having to cover a sizable portion of that via a loan, which we also entered into an agreement with the city to pay half of the debt service on that loan, which hasn't started yet because they haven't closed on the CIB loan yet. And so I guess there's some consternation about that, and I assume they're going to be discussing that at the next city council meeting maybe tonight. So I don't know if the city is really going to close on that loan or what. I mean, I'm kind of assuming that they're going to, but it hasn't happened yet. And so when they do close, we will be on the hook for paying half of the debt service on that, which I guess isn't strictly speaking our debt, but we are in agreement to pay 50% of it, which is, I think the full payment is going to be around $48,000 a year, so half of that, so around $24,000 a year that we'll be paying in addition to our $525,000.
Is that money budget for the $24,000 roughly per year for next year's?
So I do have that budgeted. I don't know. I think it's 20 probably, but I'm not sure. Since we're not doing the CIB application, I'm not ultra familiar with the details of it, but I think it's a 20-year debt service. And that's just for the infrastructure, and that's it.
And so with those kind of changes, or I guess they're not changes, but with the CIB not be what we originally were expecting for, if the city hasn't fully committed or closed with that, is that, you think we should still push them to do that, or is that? is there red flags around that deal as it is now?
That's a political
Yeah.
decision.
I guess
I'm not on the council anymore, I don't have
But,
to answer that.
I guess more with the funds and the way it's budgeted, like, does that seem like it's
Well, we're set up to carry on, I mean,
okay.
and we do have agreements. We've made commitment to that money if it goes forward, but I will say, and this is part of the sticking point, and I'm sure that this will be brought up, is that we had an MOU when we made this commitment with USU that they reneged on.
The destination.
Yeah, and so we have an MOU with them that they were going to provide this particular commitment for this particular university, and so we said, okay, we'll go ahead and we'll make the commitment of this money, we'll commit to paying the debt service, and then everything changed, and so our original commitment of this money is not happening anymore. And so now, the councils, both councils, the city and the county, have to decide if the new concept is still okay with them, because the original concept that we made our commitment according to has changed.
You're referring to the destination campus as opposed to a regional campus with the current.
Yeah, and also, the amount of money that USU was planning on contributing to the project has changed. So there's that MOU, I saw it in an email this morning, the MOU that was signed with Noel Crockett and the county council and the city council is still in effect right now, supposedly, but it's already been axed. And so,
There's nothing needed at 5.
and so I don't,
Six. What do you mean by axed?
that MOU is obviously no longer being honored by USU. And you can read it for yourself and see it's not the same concept anymore. And it's not the same amount of money that the USU was saying that they would contribute.
That it was always 5 million
6 p.m.
that they were going to contribute.
Well, can you send that email out to everybody with the MOU?
I have a.
That would be great. Send all the information you can tonight.
Did it go out to all these people here?
Right.
So I saw it this morning when I was reading my email.
So the USU is just asking us, or the local community, to contribute 2 million instead of 5 million. Is that, and they're still.
Oh, let's see.
Here we go.
If I can search it up somewhere. My email's got
Scaled down.
seriously clogged up this
Building.
Let me see if I can just pop it up real quick.
It's nothing.
MOU signed November 2017. USU agrees to begin the planning, program, and design phase for construction of a $10 million building on the intended future Moab campus. USU commits to $5 million of funding for this project on or before 2020, with the understanding that a minimum $5 million additional funds will be raised. It's understood that a significant portion of USU commitment will come from existing campus. Blah, blah, blah. I think it's just, the main sticking point really is the downgrading of a destination campus is what everybody that I remember when I was on the advisory board was adamant that we had to have. We didn't want just a fancier version of what we already have, which is...
This is just phase 1.
Yeah, and so...
This is getting your
That's
foot in
what I
the door
wanna
to get
say,
started.
baby steps.
You
Well,
can't
it's
necessarily-
less than
you
phase
can't-
one.
You can't
Phase
necessarily
one was
jump
the
to a destination
destination.
campus, immediately. And the other part of the change is that the legislature is going to be kicking in money for moving extension out there. Is part of in the mix there.
Well, the original conversation when I was on the advisory board was that the legislature was going to pay, where they were going to go to the legislature to help pay for the destination cost of actually building the destination campus, which did change also. And
My
so-
understanding is that you can get in line on that, and you're going to wait a very long time before the legislature funds you on that.
Yeah, and it was at the point that we were discussing that, we all knew that, and it was agreed upon that we were going to get in line. There's more politics to it than that, and I don't know that I necessarily should go into it, but there's always been a lot of competition between regional campuses between each other, which makes it difficult to negotiate establishing a new destination campus in the system. And that's always been difficult. But I'm not saying, one way or the other that that the county or the city should change anything about their commitment. I'm just saying that the concept of the campus has changed since we made our commitment of that money.
But that section 3 is still manageable for us with what we have in that set aside.
Well, we've already set aside the $525,000, so we don't have to come up with that. We've already got it. And, paying $24,000 on the debt service isn't some, overwhelming thing to do. It's not a huge issue, but it obviously adds up over 20 years.
Yeah. That was more why I brought it up in this one.
I guess, part of the question is, how much more can we expect it to contribute? It's quite a bit we've already contributed. And as far as I know, there's no, agreement that any of the assets will end up as being Grand County assets. They'll all end up being, as far as I know, USU assets that we, at least raise 50% of the community is raised. 50% are actually more of the cost for. It's not generally the case that we would spend that kind of money without capitalizing some of it. But I guess maybe that's just how it works in the university world. That we, the community pays a sizable portion of the cost, and the university capitalizes the assets.
And
and I know this is not the meeting to discuss it, but everyone refers to that road as the USU road. It is a community road that will support lots of infrastructure around it. It's not necessarily USU.
Well, it will support.
That's Sitla.
The 525 that we've put aside is a community contribution.
Well, it will support infrastructure certainly for Sitla's portion, but they've also contributed, not as much as we have, but I think Sitla committed $180,000.
I thought it was 250.
I can't remember. I don't know that it was that much, but they were contributing to part of it. And how much of that particular bit of infrastructure extends into the adjacent private property and can serve, to the north, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know how many more entry roads are planned for all of that property, but all I'm saying is that it's changed, and so it will be a decision, a political decision, whether or not to move forward. Mostly with the city, I would think. The county's already made the commitment. I haven't heard anybody say that they would change that or not. But moving forward with it is not a big deal. We've already got it budgeted. We've already got the money set aside to make that commitment. So. Moving on to the impact fees, we've got 3 active impact fees that we can use. We've got an impact fee for law enforcement, roads, and drainage projects. And so with regard to impact fees, the laws tightened up quite a bit over the last several years, where you can only collect impact fees on projects that you can complete within 6 years of implementing the impact fee. So that really places, considerable limitations on how much of an impact fee you can assess. And because the repercussions of not getting those projects done is that you have to pay the impact fee back to everybody that paid it. And so you do have to be pretty careful. But the capital facilities plan, which we budgeted, or, trying to budget anyway, to happen next year, get a revision next year, is where we put those projects, or where we identify those projects for the impact fee, and then based on the totals of those projects, that's how the consultant will come up with what the impact fee is. Go ahead.
Can I just add another eligible one would be parks, and we are entertaining in the very early stages the idea of doing a sandflats type agreement with state lands out at Village Springs and Milton Western. I don't know that anything would come to fruition in 2019, but they are moving quickly on it. They're talking like it's possible. So that's another potential impact fee. I don't know. That's what we're talking about.
Oh yeah, well I think that we should definitely get a better grasp on that. Like for instance, when we had the only real project that we had slated for the Parks and Recreation impact fee was the Osta Ball Fields. So when that project got done, we canceled that impact fee. However, through that entire process, Grand County paid $300,000 as a match to the federal grant that we got for the transit hub and the river bike trail. If we would have thought or planned it out better, we could have been assessing impact fees for that. And if we think about it, we could probably, at some point in time, I don't know if in this next cycle, plan for impact fees for the Spanish Valley Trail, Spanish Valley Drive Trail. But yeah, it definitely should be thought a little bit more about in terms of, what could be put into the capital facilities plan. But you do have to make sure that whatever you put in there and you're collecting fees for can be realized in 6 years. Otherwise, you're on the hook to pay it back.
That's why we wouldn't put Spanish Valley Pathway in there. This next one.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it in, or I wouldn't. You might be able to get into the capital facilities plan, but I wouldn't necessarily use that as a component of coming up with an impact fee unless you knew that you could get the project done within 6 years of imposing the fee.
And it's not just breaking ground, it's all done.
I don't know. I mean, I think that if you have a project started, you're probably okay. I'm not sure on that. I think that it just has to be an actual project that's underway, real expenses happening, obligated to a realistic project. But I'm not sure that it has to be completely done, because you can redo your capital facilities plan and continue on with it. But I think you do have to have expended those funds that you get. So if you were to get an impact fee next year, that money would have to be spent on the project that you identified within 6 years of collecting the impact fee. So it's kind of rolling along. And if you haven't done that within 6 years, then you have to pay it back. And so they accumulate, but impact fees never, ever are enough to do the full project. So there's usually, if you really do get a project underway, there's no problem spending the impact fees. It's just like with our Jackson Street drainage project. We don't even have enough money in impact fees and what we put aside in stormwater to cover the full cost of that project. We still have to come up with another $111,000. So I guess what I'm saying is that if you really do get a project underway, it's pretty easy to spend those impact fees on it. It's a matter of getting a project underway. And so you should be pretty certain that you're going to be able to start on a project within 6 years if you start collecting impact fees for it.
It should be completed or would...
Started at least. Like I say, the money has to be spent. And it's, like the money for 2019 would have to be spent by by the end of 2025 or something like that. So, but then the money for 2020 would have to be spent by the end of 2026.
And is the planning and surveying and that sort of stuff included in that, or is it just the actual building?
I'm not sure what the rules are, if you can incorporate, I think you can incorporate design and other costs. I'm not sure, I'd have to look at the law and what they allow. But it does have to be, you can't collect impact fees to upgrade existing facilities, and you can't collect impact fees for maintenance of existing facilities. It all has to be new stuff that's serving new growth, because it's the new growth that's paying for it. So we do have some money in there. A lot of it's going to get spent out this year for the drainage component. I think Diana and I have calculated there's about $115,000 in the drainage impact fee account right now, and we'll probably be drawing all of that out to help pay for the Jackson Street project. So we also collect impact fees for other entities like the fire district, but it's just pass through. We take it in and we send it off. So some of that money might, just be sort of what you might consider trust and agency money. Drug court is, there's 75 cents in there. The Atlas Tailings Fund's got some balance. And the original grant that we got for that position that Russ Von Cook has got right now, was for a full-time benefited position, which got really pulled back. Lee didn't want to do that. He didn't feel like there was that much work, and so we actually, haven't made full use of that. But it's about $50,000 a year, and we spend more like less than 35 usually on that particular grant. It's coming up for renewal this August, I think, and the performance period ends next January. And so I relayed that to Russ that he's going to have to reapply for that grant if he wants to have his position exist next year.
And that's a different fund than the other fund.
It's the same one. It's just called Atlas Tailings Fund.
It is all the same.
It's just a different word. I mean, it's not. It may have been started before we got. It was started before we got that grant, and before the project really. It was more. I think that it was more of a lobbying fund to begin with. Trying to get the project started. Once the project gets started, then it got a more official name. And so, yeah, if we were to name that fund nowadays, we probably wouldn't call it Atlas Tailings Fund, but that's what it's called. But it is for the UMTRA project and the position that the DOE provides us a grant with for monitoring and liaising. And then debt service on the courthouse, again, that's the fund balance that's in there, which is money that could be used, as we discussed, to either pay off the remaining payments and cancel, or retire the property tax that's being assessed for that. Or if we can continue to draw the property tax to pay the full debt service, then that will end up being, according to auditors, if that were to happen, this money could be then transferred into the general fund, but it can't be before then. So I'm not entirely sure whether this amount of money would be used to pay off the last payments, the last couple payments, or what. I don't know. That's something I'd have to talk to
So
the
is
tax
that like
commissioner.
something Evan mentioned earlier? You said that might be a good idea to do that with?
Yeah, I don't know. We should do something with it.
Yeah,
If it ends up paying off the last couple payments, and that would mean that we would retire the property tax early. But if we were allowed to continue collecting property tax and use the collections of property tax all the way up to the maturity date of the debt, then this money would just still be sitting in there, and you know, we did try to actually transfer this money out and use it to help pay the jail remodel, but like I said, the auditors were not happy about that, so we didn't do that.
So if we paid off the debt service on schedule, and that money were still in there, then it would, you can make a one-time contribution to the general fund or
I think so. That's
operating fund or
what Diana told me the auditor said.
Okay.
But it makes me a little suspicious because it's like if you collected that money for that specific purpose, I wouldn't be surprised if the tax commission forced us to use it to pay off the last few payments or the last couple of payments, you know,
Yeah.
instead of collecting more property tax. But I don't know.
It'd be a good piece of information to have.
Why wouldn't you want to just pay it off anyway?
Well, because you could continue to collect property tax on it, and then that money might end up being able to help contribute to the general fund. But if we use it to pay off the debt service, then, you know, we would obviously stop collecting property tax on it.
On that particular thing early. Stop early.
So, I don't know. That's something I have to research. I have to call up Josh Nielsen and see what they expect to happen with that. Then in the building authority, we've got fund balances for all the different debt services that move through there. And I haven't done any research yet to find out, you know, if that's a true surplus or what it is. That's something I'd have to check in with Diana about also. The library also has got this fund balance in their debt service, which again is similar to the courthouse because it's a general obligation bond that the citizens passed to pay off the debt service on the library.
So how much was left on the library?
Let's see.
There was
2025.
Yeah, so it's getting close also to, I mean, not super close, but we're on the fourth quarter, I guess you can say, of that one. Coming into it anyway. But,
How much do we owe still in the library?
$1,000,000. Let me scroll over here. So let's see, started in 2004, and we've been, the balance, this balance is I don't think I've updated this balance yet, but it would be, this was from last year, and so it'd be that much less that.
$940,000.
So. But again, that's that gets paid by property taxes, and so it's not something that we're having to come up with the money for. There is this fund balance in there. And again, it's the same question that I would have with the courthouse fund balances. Can it be used?
Yeah.
And why don't we use that to pay, at least put that on the balance?
Well, that might be exactly what the tax commission wants us to do. I have to find out.
I mean, what other reason is there for it?
Well, the other reason for it is that you can collect taxes on the remaining years that it exists, and then if you can put that reserve amount into the general fund at the end of it, then
Yeah, but that's, I mean, this taxpayers' money.
No, I understand. I'm just saying that's the logic behind it.
So what are we doing, playing games with the taxpayers' money?
No, I mean, we're doing that now anyway, as far as I can see.
I know, but,
I mean, I'm not saying what I would do personally, how I would suggest doing it, but I'm just saying that was the other alternative than paying it off immediately is letting it run and then paying it off and then using the money to go into the general fund. That was the discussion.
So I'll call the tax commission and find out what they expect to happen with that. The capital projects, this is the general funds capital projects fund, $690,000 in there. It's kind of stalled out. When I was on the council, I was trying to build that fund up, and I think the last contribution to it was in 2016, but there's been no and that was $500,000 contribution. There hasn't been a contribution over the last couple of years that have gone into capital projects. And but I have budgeted to put I think about 1038 into it, specifically for different needs that department heads have relayed to me. New roofs, carport for the weed department, several Spanish Trail Arena projects.
That's for 2018 or 2019?
2019. There's nothing that's been budgeted to go into it this year or last year. So,
Can that fund balance be used to cover that money that we're planning to put in for 2019? Or is it restricted?
you know, I guess you could change what it's for. You know, my purpose, I think, when I was on the council was to start saving up money for new office space, et cetera, and operational space. I don't think that there's any reason why the council can't change their mind about what the money is supposed to be going for.
Would this be the time to talk about our taxiway?
I guess I haven't really heard an update, but
I've got one.
so
This
you
within
might
the
want
last week or is this?
Yesterday.
Oh, God.
So Jed is meeting with us. So this is in addition to what you guys heard about 6 weeks ago.
The
From
props,
all the
right?
rain, we've got more issues up here. So he sent a photo of it. It was pretty bad. He's going to send a write-up to council, through the council ad email this morning. He's meeting with the engineers now. Here's his summary. The picture shows softball-sized chunks with the water coming out of the ground. I'll just read what he wrote. Brought to council attention about 6 weeks ago when ruts formed in multiple locations. Sunday rain caused failure in one spot. When ruts formed, the taxiway made unusable for large aircraft, not unusable for all aircraft. So it's the large aircraft where we have an issue. Meeting with engineers and hardstand contractor this morning. Project starting on Monday. We'll see if one, can they fix, two, cost in terms of time and money. And then he goes on to say he'll be applying for a $5 million grant later this month to replace the taxiway, either 90-10% split or 95-5, depending on the economic distress classification. Anything we can do now will be a Band-Aid. And he met with Bill Jackson yesterday to try and start a hydrant. So that's what we've got. Watch for your council ad, but it sounds like we definitely need to put some money. So 5% would be
250.
250 and 10%.
That wasn't on the new stuff, but that's on the taxiway.
This is on the taxiway.
Yeah, this is,
It's weird because on Sunday I flew home from Denver and they used the taxiway. It kind of made me nervous. SkyWest did, so I was going to text Judd and see what's going on there, but they used it.
What day was that?
Sunday.
So maybe larger aircraft you're referring to, larger than Skywest, let me find out.
But I guess it sounds like we've got to figure out where to come up with another 250 for that.
For a Band-Aid.
No, for the actual project.
Okay.
I don't know how much the Band-Aid's going to cost yet.
He's trying to put that together.
But-
Well, I don't understand, the parts where the ruts are where we're going to add on to that apron, so I'm like, I don't understand why we can't just add that little section with the apron on for now.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to Judd yet.
I don't know, it sounds like we're going to have to deal with some emergency funding soon this year. And then to cover the cost of that grant, if the council goes forward with it, we'll have to come up with at least another 250 to make the match if we, you know, continue to be classified as economically distressed community. And I haven't budgeted 250 for that project anywhere in the budget right now.
We didn't bring it up.
You know, I suppose you could say, well, let's take some of that money out of the capital projects and designate it for that. And so next year, we would budget to draw off that fund balance and then send it to the airport's capital improvements fund.
But we couldn't put TRCC stuff in the capital projects. could we?
Yeah.
We can't.
If it's for a project that qualifies for that particular expense, but usually what I do for capital projects that are coming out of TRCC is to either spend it straight out of that fund, so there's no mistake, that it's being mixed up and being used inappropriately, or I transfer it to a fund where it's obviously eligible, like the airport's capital projects. So the airport has a capital projects fund also. So if you made a contribution from TRCC to that fund, you'd be certain that it was a appropriate use of the money. If you just transferred it into the general fund's capital projects fund, then, the auditors would want to make certain that you showed that money was being spent on something that was eligible for TRCC. And it's a little harder to do when you're mixing up general fund money and those other kinds of monies. So it's, like for instance, this for next year with 2019, I budgeted for, I think, 2 of the roofs that need to be redone. And we might actually be able to bring that down, because it sounds like, at least with some of the roofs, that we can just do some repairs instead of replacement. I still haven't talked with Marvin about how much that would be, but just as a, for instance, I budgeted to spend that straight out of the TRCC fund instead of transferring it to a capital projects fund.
Like about TRCC, it's the back end of the Act, Tourism, Recreation, Cultural Conventions, but then there's this AF, that's airport facilities. So we always think of TRCC as, I'd like us to be thinking about airport, because it's specifically for airport facilities.
So yeah, anyway, I did budget to increase the contribution. We have been putting $200,000 from TRCC into the airport's operational expenses every year. And because the council approved those 2 landslide operation positions to come out of TRCC, that meant I had to increase the TRCC that's going to airport to $325,000 a year to cover those 2 positions. And so, that's just something that, the council really has to keep in mind, is that, obviously we're getting a lot of money in grants, but in a lot of cases, the money that we're getting, is creating more expense for us, more ongoing expense for us. So you just have to keep that in mind, that as the airport expands, there's going to be increased maintenance costs, increased labor costs. And so the money isn't entirely free.
So does it make sense to actually?
Well, that's something.
I'd like to be able to give Judd something, like, we're going to budget something.
Well, I think the council should keep in mind that there is this capital projects fund that's got a balance, it wasn't originally, that money wasn't put in there originally to cover those expenses, but it's not to say that you can't reallocate it. This money, like I say, when it was put in there, was more along the concept of saving up for operational space, but if there's other priorities, then that's the fund balance that's in there. Any other questions on the capital projects? Moving on, we've got the road capital projects fund, which is somewhat recent, and just barely started really putting money into that. There's $100,000 in there. I think last year maybe, or the year before, was the first time that we really transferred any money into that.
What's that for?
It could be for road projects, so I think that's what Bill wants to use it for. And, since like I said, mineral leases dropped off, the Transportation Special Service District is playing a considerably lesser role in supporting transportation projects. But, which is okay though, because we did get the optional transportation tax passed, which is, going to bring in $700,000 to $800,000 a year. The road allocation change, which went up about $900,000 a year, and so since that money is really coming into the B Road fund, what I told Bill is if you have a surplus, in your budget, then you should consider transferring that over to your capital projects fund, applying a project to it, and then budgeting that money next year in the capital projects fund to be spent, so that if he does get the opportunity to work on any of these transportation projects, the money's there and it's already budgeted to be expended. And if he doesn't get to the project, then it just rolls over. So that's kind of the concept of that. We just put money in there, budget to spend the money. If it doesn't get spent, we just amend the budget at the end of the year, roll the money back over, and do it again next year. But if we just keep socking the surpluses away into his B Roads fund, it's not budgeted to be spent. And so if you want to do a project, you'd have to open the budget back up and amend the budget to bring that money back into it. But if you just send it to the capital projects fund and you budget to spend the money, it doesn't necessarily matter whether you do or whether you don't. It will be, but you won't have to go through jump through the hoops of changing the budget to make it possible to spend the money. So that's the purpose there. I think we'll probably end up sending about, 325,000 or so from B Roads into this fund next year, and possibly this year also. So I kind of mentioned the concept to Bill. He hasn't entirely come up with a capital projects plan yet, but that's how I would like to do it, is to send some money in there and get some projects on queue. The healthcare sales tax, this was the opening balance, but all that got appropriated out to, through the audit process, got appropriated out to the 2 districts that are eligible to receive it. So that's just a pass-through fund for us. We don't get any of that anymore, or we won't anymore because of the transfer of EMS to a district. The emergency medical services, this is EMS. They opened the year with about $380,000 fund balance, and when we get our agreements all in place, whatever the net on that is for next year, we'll just be transferring over to the service district. The Loop Road project, we're still trying to work on closing that all out. This year we will, and so that's obligated to that specific project. It did end up being, I think, about $200,000 under budget, but we were initially thinking that maybe that would be refunded to our contribution, but it's not likely. I think that the other entities that are involved in that project are going to take that savings. And so I think that our contribution is going to remain the same for that project.
Hey, Chris?
Yeah.
Is there any way you can group things that are similar together? So you can put all the road stuff together, so you can see it all at one time instead of spread out all over the place? So you can put all the airport stuff together?
Well, these funds have numbers that go with them.
Yeah.
Those are the numbers. So what do you mean? Like just, they are what they are right now. So, trying to change how they are number-wise is...
do you understand what I'm saying?
Just for the sake of reporting, like in a deal like this, if you grouped them all together, then it'd be easier to understand the big picture of what's going on with the airport or the roads.
So, yeah,
or whatever.
I mean, it's not...
You wouldn't have to renumber anything, just for the sake of it.
For the most part,
For the meeting.
yeah, I mean, for the most part, there's only 2 funds that go with each thing, if there are even 2 funds. So, for instance, Class B roads, you have the sum of 21 and 35, I think.
I don't know, it would be easier for me if they were just right after each other. So all the road stuff is together, all the other things are together that are similar.
Okay. Well, I would just have to reorganize it out of order that they are in the accounting.
Yeah, just for the
I
meeting.
mean, we're just
But-
jumping all over the place all the time.
Well, sort of. So we can kind of cover, capital projects are kind of grouped down here amongst themselves. But it's not that difficult. There's only $100,000 in the road capital projects, and so that means the total fund balance for roads is $3.4 million.
Sorry, Chris, the debt service on the library, that's the loan for the building, or for the payment, construction of it.
So that's paid off, Rory, by a general obligation bond, so property taxes. We did have a discussion, because there's a surplus in these accounts that have accrued over the years from bringing in slightly more property tax than the debt service is. So that adds up over the years. But we need to talk with the tax commission to find out what's going to happen with that money. Don't know yet. I think that it's likely, in my opinion, the tax commission will say, you will use that money in the end to pay off the last payment or two, and we'll retire the property tax earlier than scheduled. I don't know. I've got to find out. But that money at this point is obligated to that specific debt. And then the capital projects general fund, so we've got this 690 that's going to be, added essentially as far as the general fund is concerned to this 4.192. Those two kind of go together because they're similar money. You can always transfer money out of the general fund and into capital projects. And it's not strictly necessary to do unless, as Chris Kaufman's email indicated, that we hit that 50% mark. And I think, what did you calculate? Somewhere between near 6 million? 6 million would be the limit.
Whatever the general fund revenue is for the current fiscal period, and I think last time we looked at that, we were nearing 12 million.
So it'd be around a little less than 6 million.
I know historically we've been somewhere in that $10 million-ish range, and we're probably edging up.
Yeah, we're in the 12 now. I mean, it kind of depends on how much we can transfer in and what is entirely considered. I mean, we can transfer, like for instance, a certain amount of the transient room tax into the general fund, and that helps bring that revenue up a lot. But it's restricted to only certain departments in the general fund.
I think, and Chris, this isn't in any way a criticism of what you've done, because I know you've got so much on your plate, but in the future, another reorganization of this that might be useful to me would be more by what, rather than department, but by which ones we can actually use for different purposes, which is what you were just starting to do. Like, these are the ones we can actually use for different things.
Yeah, and I can summarize that really quick at the end here, because most of these, you don't really have a lot of leeway to use them to help pay for things. They're just sort of elements. Moving through like the Children's Justice Center, Family Support Center, those are kind of self-contained, grant-funded entities. RSVP, I think this is not really in use anymore. It's got a balance, but I think that has to do with Berlin's Grand Center operation.
It's no longer it's a federal program.
So
Retired senior volunteer.
there's still some money in there, but I don't know what its obligations are.
I will say that the Grand Center, you may recall, just this year, decided to add in the volunteer program again into one of the job descriptions over there.
Okay.
That's federal money, though, so I'm sure that, but
Yeah, I'll have to check. The airports, 56 is the airport's capital projects fund. And, all that money is probably going to be used to match the projects that we have underway this year. So that's, a lot of our contribution that we've plugged in there to make this runway and terminal project happen. Sandflat's got a, Sandflat, oh, go
sorry, I
ahead.
have an update on the airport. So to answer your question, Mr. Paxman, So flights were still able to go and come back and land, but instead of 7 access points to the runway, we are down to 1 access point to the runway. So we don't have to close the airport. That's why Skywest was able to land on Sunday. But he says it hurts the efficiency by about 50%, depending on the wind direction. So that's why we have to have an emergency repair to get more access to the runway.
To fix the taxiway, right?
To fix the taxiway first.
So yeah, I think that all this money that we started off the year with in the airport is obligated to these projects. I think we're really budgeting to just draw that whole thing down. So I still have to balance that account this year. Sandflats has a pretty sizable fund balance. And Sandflats is a enterprise fund, which means that it can be accounted for differently. It's even though we don't really use the full concept of an enterprise fund with Sandflats, we still do modified accrual accounting with them, even though there's, I suppose, the capacity to do more cash-based accounting. But this is all revenue over expenses, very specific to Sandflats, its fees and expenses. The library's operational fund has about started off with about a $540,000 fund balance. And so in terms of approving, for instance, the salary adjustments without increasing the property tax, this would be the account that would be drawn down to cover the budget. And so there's started off the year with about 540. And so this is the only real way that the library has to make up for a deficit, is to draw off that fund right there.
So what you're saying is for any salary increase?
Yeah. So, I mean, you really have two options with the library. Either draw off that fund balance or increase their property tax to cover.
There's no prohibition from sending general fund money to the library, is there?
No, I guess that's an option too. It's never been taken, but.
Not saying it's a good one, I'm just saying it is on the table.
But, you know, it's considering that we're running a deficit on the general fund too, you know, it's like, you either raise property taxes in one or the other, I don't know. We don't have extra money to send over there, I guess is what I'm saying.
So, Chris, how much of a job, to get back to this thing with the state figuring out these loan payments and stuff, how much is a job for you to find that out? Because that'd be interesting, because if we can pay off some of those loans early, then that would be good information for us to have, you know, and deal with.
It's still a ways out, you know, but 2022 is when, you know, I think that the budgeting if it's possible to use that money to pay off 1 or 2 payments, and we could retire that property tax early, then I guess probably what you're getting at is that it would make a property tax increase more palatable, because you would just be, you know, switching the money that you're currently collecting for the courthouse GO bond, and instead perhaps, you know, use bringing up the library and or the general operations loan. So I'll check on that. I guess I've got to check it with I mean, it's a question really probably for the tax commission, and so I'll just call and say, you know, what's appropriate, what happens when you have a fund balance in your GO bond fund. So I can get back with you on that. I don't, you know, it's just a matter of asking the tax commission, I guess.
Yeah.
Did the library put on the ballot for raising the tax issue?
Well, it's the county council's responsibility, and so when it be a ballot initiative, the council would just go through truth and taxation and either decide to raise the tax or not. And so it's, you know, that's how it works for the library and also the general operations line item. The library has put some money also into their capital projects fund, $142,000. And so as far as, you know, wiggle room goes, we've got the general fund balance is what, you know, know, we have to work with in terms of covering any deficit that we have in the general fund. So if we're, for instance, you know, going to run, right now, you know, we're looking at, I think about a $1.2 million deficit, but, you know, probably 400,000 at least of that is contingency that's not likely to be spent. And so, you know, at some point, I would predict, you know, that we, you know, if we were to just go forward with no property tax increase and approve the salary adjustments, that, you know, it's likely that we would draw at least probably 500,000 off the general fund balance. And so that, and if we did, you know, that's where we would budget to pull it from, to balance the budget using that fund right there for the general fund specifically. In addition, we have this balance in the restaurant and car tax, and also this TRT down here. So those two have no obligations. They're funds that have built up over the years from bringing in more revenue than we budgeted or spent. And so these could be used also to balance the budget. We just have to remember that they are not ongoing revenue. And so if you budget that to use that to cover ongoing costs, you know, you're pretty quickly going to have a bit of a rude awakening for the next budgeting session where you really are, you know, out of money that way. The travel count, like I said, the travel council's fund balance is, we need for cash flow purposes, so I, you know, wouldn't use that. I wouldn't pull any more out of that. Think what else? And then, you know, the capital projects, in the general fund, that amount of money can be used to cover, you know, capital expenses. Like I say, it was put in there for the purpose, I think, of, generally speaking, saving up money for operational space. But if the council were to reprioritize that money, we could say that, for instance, let's cancel out for this year the contribution of $238,000, and then we'll just draw off the fund balance instead. You know, and a similar thing could happen in terms of a transfer to the airport for the $250,000 in match. And so there's the possibility of using that money that's in the bank instead of using next year's projected revenue, which would bring the cost down, you know, of next year's budget, or get us closer to the bottom line. I mean, like I said, we could draw the fund balance off of the TRCC, the TRT, use the fund balance from the capital projects fund to cover all the capital expenses instead of putting more money in there to cover them. And we would have probably a balanced budget. But, like I say, all of that money is money that's in the bank. It's not revenue. It's not ongoing annual revenue. So you just have to realize that you might be able to balance the budget for next year and approve the salary adjustments. But that's going to catch up with you. The expenses will eventually catch up with us.
I want to make sure I understand this correctly. So what you're saying is the general fund, the restaurant and car tax, the TRT county portion, and the capital projects general fund are the core funds that we have some flexibility with. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, you can use that money in any combination that you want to balance the budget for next year. You just have to realize that that's money that's been saved up over the years, and when you draw it down, it doesn't get easily replenished, especially if you're running close to a deficit. And so, you know, I guess what I'm saying is there is the possibility of reducing the demand on next year's revenue to balance the budget by using money that we have in the bank. And we talked about that as an option in the strategies that we discussed at the last meeting. It is an option, and whether you want to do that in total or in part or whatever, that's the strategies that we have available to us. So it's something to think about in terms of meeting the demand of this increased expense with the salary adjustment.
If you're going to use that as a strategy, you've got to have a plan for
How we're going
what
to,
you're going to do in the future.
yeah, so it'd be a strategy, a one-time fix, but then you would
Yeah,
have
then
to
you-
be figuring out what
It's-
you're going to do in the future to build the funds up again.
Yeah.
It's hardly a fix, it's just a way to kick the can down the road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other problem with it, from my perspective, is at least with regard to capital projects, is that money really did get put in there for a specific purpose. And so if you're changing the purpose, then you're, taking a step back from the operational space concept. And I talked briefly with Curtis yesterday, and I guess what I'd say is if our only priority really were to do the salary adjustment, cover the cost of the salary adjustment, but we were willing to, deprioritize stormwater mitigation and operational space needs, then we probably could get away without doing a property tax increase. I think that we would draw off the general fund for a year, maybe 2 years to cover, but revenue, if the economy continues to grow, then the revenue from sales and use tax, TRT, TRCC will continue to go up, and we'll probably catch up. But it will never really catch up, probably, with the stormwater infrastructure liabilities and the operational space needs without, some kind of revenue increase in the general fund. And so to me, it's not so much about the salary adjustments as it is about the big picture. And the big picture being that we have a lot of space needs, operational space needs, stormwater infrastructure needs, and the question is how to cover that and the salary adjustment.
And another part of the big picture is the subsidies that are going out to the other agencies, particularly, the Care Center, EMS, and solid waste. So one potential strategy for fixing, revenue stream in the future would be to take it to the voters to say, would you prefer to have a property tax increase from the county, or would you prefer to increase the rural healthcare sales tax to actually cover the costs of what the Care Center and the EMS are?
Well, at this point, we were fairly successful in almost eliminating that, but right now, the contribution the county's making is $79,000, so that's how much we have to reclaim.
Well, we talked about it at the
Well,
meeting.
you mean with regard to transferring mineral lease? We have to look at that contract we have with the Healthcare Special Service District, because I'm pretty sure that it was specific to mineral lease that we were on the hook to provide. Like, we signed a contract with the Healthcare Special Service District. It wasn't just for $335,000, it was for $335,000 of mineral lease money.
So how much mineral lease is going into EMS now?
EMS, what did we decide? It was like 35% of what the rec district was getting, so that's EWS. So that is something that, can be transferred over. But yeah, I think that it's possible that,
So I'm sorry, can
We
I
could-
interrupt here?
go
Isn't
ahead.
this a separate agenda item? Shouldn't we go on with pay positions and then
Yeah.
come back to the,
yeah, part of the reason though why I am going over this fund balance
Right.
overview is to discuss the strategies associated with.
I
with it,
agree.
so.
And maybe they should have been contiguous items. I don't know, but it seems like there is.
Well, the next one is very germane to the subject as
I
well.
know.
Yeah, it's all-
Oh my gosh.
Bruce?
Just for nomenclature purposes, we hear rainy day fund and fund balance, general fund. It took me a long time to get it, so if this is helpful. General fund balance that we're looking at over there that started in 2018 is the rainy day fund. That
The
is our
general
savings
fund.
account.
Mhm.
the general.
Right.
Yeah, the term rainy day fund is a colloquialism for the general fund's balance. It's not a real technical term. So the technical term is just the general fund balance. And so you
That
can
is
call
the
it,
dollar amount up there, 4.1.
yeah, that's where we started off with. So that's, that money right there is relatively unrestricted and can be used for virtually any purpose that's an allowable government expense.
Can
And so-
we zero out TRT and TRCC into the general fund?
We pretty much do, because the allowable expenses that exist in the general fund are greater than the revenue of the TRT, so it is zeroed out.
You can't just move that money directly from there to there, but you could put it into the sheriff's budget, reduce what he's spending, and put it into the.
So, it has to be,
Yeah.
if we were to take this money out of the fund balance, it would still have to go to eligible expenses.
Right, okay.
So law enforcement, search and rescue, it could go to OSTA, it could go to the Grant Center, because they're considered convention facilities and have recreational components. And so there's still a considerable amount of operational expenses in those that are not covered by these tourism-derived taxes specifically. And so if we did draw this out, it would go into offsetting general fund expenses, and that's how it would help. And that's where we should put it into, those particular departments that are eligible to receive it, and also are receiving a contribution from the general fund to cover whatever the balance would be on them. So, that's a good strategy for the short term.
Chris, the capital general fund projects, that's like money that we've been saving, maybe do another building, right?
Yeah, that was my intention.
So I would like
but I
to see us, use more of that and maybe look at selling some of our property, county property that you have, and putting it back into that.
That's an option. Like I say, instead of drawing $238,000 that I budgeted to come out of the current, or our next year's actual revenue, we could cancel that out and draw that 238 off of this balance instead.
I just think we're gonna have a hard time going to the taxpayers and saying, well, we're gonna use this to build new buildings when we know that most of these people in town already know that we're building just the way that we're built. Like schools, we're getting more schools, we're getting more, it just seems like just you build it, I just think you're gonna have a hard time.
What?
If only we had more of those buildings and less hotels.
Yes, the building I think that's going on is private. More than-
Well, we gotta have those to get our taxes, so.
But as we, as we progress into discussing the proposed positions,
Yeah.
you'll see that even though we have a need for new positions, we don't have any place to put them. That's been a limitation literally for as long as I've been working with the county.
It just seems like that we have all these needs that for the 4 years I've been on the board, we talk about, but some of them we've not done anything about. Having them my first time I went in, wasn't John's office then, but it was just, I was just shocked. It was like a closet.
It's Matt's office.
Matt's office. A lot of them, they're just,
John's.
Are we ready to move on?
Yeah,
Yes, please.
sounds like we're getting there.
Rather than under the
There's
stairs.
some needs analysis coming up.
So, as far as proposed positions go, these are all the ones that I could think of
this is the
anyway.
third,
Yeah, so moving on to the C, proposed positions for 2019. Some of these are actually probably for 2018 also, and I'll bring that up when we get to it. We did discuss with the council moving trail mix employees from CNHA to the county, and also approving 2 full-time positions, and then, a certain number of hours of part-time positions. So that's what this would look like. And so I did some research, and it appears to me that the optional transportation tax could pay for the operations associated with trail mix, and so that's probably where I would draw that from. That would be kind of, a transfer from B roads into whatever fund we set up for trail mix. We're also budgeting to draw from trail mix's fund balance $35,000. They only have, I think, $57,000 in their fund balance, so you couldn't do that even for 2 years, just 1 year really. So that's those positions. Moving on to the jail. There's a proposed administrative assistant, which is, really sorely needed. The Sheriff's Department has 2 administrative assistants, and the jail has none. And this year, there was budgeted a maintenance tech position for the jail. I'm still trying to figure out if that was ever approved as a job position or not. But regardless of whether it was approved, it was budgeted for. And so this would, essentially have no effect on the budget itself if it were approved, considering that other position was also budgeted. But it would be a new position that hasn't existed before, an administrative assistant for the jail.
Who would do the maintenance then?
Well, Marvin, who's always done it.
Okay.
So it never really got off the ground, that concept yet. And I mean, maybe in the future it would, but Shan and Steve don't seem to think that it's a priority right now, where this administrative assistant is considered a priority. And I think Shan might actually be coming to the council to get us approved for this year, in part because the monies have been budgeted for a position that's not been filled. These 2 dispatchers, Steve indicated to me, were necessary to maintain our certification for dispatch. And so, I don't know that we even have an option on that if we want to maintain our certification for dispatch.
So Chris, how did you come up with the trail technician wage compared to the dispatch wage?
This is,
It seems
this,
to me like,
I didn't come up with it, to be quite honest. This came from, I think, Zachariah.
Actually, didn't visit it, just transferred for what they're making now.
I mean, it is close to what they're making now, but, this step and grade arrangement is, is what Zachariah recommended. So, it'll be up to the council, I suppose. If we were to cut it much more than that, they would be taking a pay cut, but.
well, I just think it's so close to dispatch, and to me, in my mind, it just seems like that's just more.
Well, part of it too, I think part of it too is, that the steps for the dispatch are budgeted as step 1. But these people have been working already with trail mix for a few years, and so these are representative of a higher step than 1. So that's part of it. But, the salary structure for trail mix, I didn't really, we got some market data, and Zachariah reviewed it and made the recommendations that we see here. So that's where that comes from. The dispatch is also a component, was derived from market data for dispatch, and that's actually a big increase for dispatch. And I think that most dispatchers, if the salary adjustment goes through, are going to, see a pretty significant adjustment because they've been really severely underpaid, according to the market data anyway. This registered nurse is a part-time position, 312 hours a year, and this is, again, Shan's probably going to come to the council for this because it's a requirement to have state inmates. And they're pretty much ready to go on state inmates, but they do need to get this position approved because it's necessary. So that would be a part-time position, and we kind of calculated roughly needing to budget about 312 hours a year.
And we budgeted in revenue to the 2019 budget for state inmates, correct?
For 2019, not
Yeah.
for this year though, and so if they do get going this year, I assume there'll be some revenue that we didn't budget for this year. But Shan did say, to be safe, to only budget for revenue for 4 inmates. He was originally thinking that we could get up to 7 or 8, but he couldn't guarantee that, so we kind of budgeted for the revenue to come in from 4 inmates.
And would that cover the nurse and then some?
It can't go to covering the nurse, unfortunately, and so.
I could have gone to dispatch.
Huh?
I go to dispatch.
No, it's got, I think that it's kind of restricted that, well, I don't know, I mean, it just goes into the general fund and offsets the cost, but
That's
the amount of money I think that we get back from the state through the contract, it covers probably, more than the cost that we have. I mean, generally that's why people, or jails, like to bring these inmates in as a sort of a revenue stream for the jail to subsidize some of those costs, but
well, I know if we have a lot of them, it's beneficial, but if we, aren't filling the beds, does it still make sense to?
I haven't done that analysis,
Okay.
but if we have the availability, I
Sure.
think it's a good thing to do. But the registered nurse, it's not I guess what I'm saying, it's not reimbursable state inmate expense. We couldn't say, here's the bill state for this nurse. We have to pay it out of our budget.
Right.
And so it's not a reimbursable expense. Some health costs are reimbursable from state inmates, like prescriptions and whatnot, but you can't send the state a bill for the nurse. So that's what's up with the jail proposed. And I think that Shan's going to come to the council probably for the administrative assistant and the nurse soon. It won't have a big impact on the budget, but just to kind of give you a heads up. At the Old Spanish Trail Arena, the current lead tech has been essentially fulfilling the role of the assistant manager. He's been doing everything that Steve does when Steve's gone, just basically fulfilling the role of an assistant manager. And so it's not a new position. We're just proposing to reclassify the lead tech to post to assistant manager. So we're not adding a
No, you're not adding a position,
We're
you're
not
just.
adding a position, but
just reclassifying.
I will say that the proposed salary is reflective of that change in reclassification. So I didn't budget this, or I didn't propose the salary for this position based on the lead tech. I proposed it based on the assistant manager.
Is this already baked into the 2019 budget?
It's baked into the 2019 proposed salary adjustment, which hasn't been incorporated into the budget yet, but I have it separately in the software to see what it is.
And those jail positions are in there or not currently?
Yeah, I think they all are in the proposed part of the budget.
Okay.
They're not plugged into the budget yet, but they're in the proposed budget. Or the proposed salary adjustment part of the budget.
Regarding OSTA reclassification, that is part of succession planning also. For that.
There you go.
All right. So yeah, although I will take that back, the administrative assistant, like I say, it's not budgeted for an administrative assistant. It's budgeted for a maintenance position. I don't know if the maintenance position ever got appropriately approved, but the money did get budgeted for. Moving on, the travel council, Elaine requested part-time social media person. Part-time at, I don't know, 1,300 hours a year, she said, maybe. $16.86 an hour to start. And that would get paid for out of, if it did get approved, it would be paid for out of the travel council's budget. So that wouldn't affect the general fund.
It's less money going to promotion.
Another kind of circumstance that's really similar to Trail Mix is that I found out that the Thompson Welcome Center, for whatever reason, has been run by a nonprofit. And it's kind of, I don't really understand why Trail Mix got established under a nonprofit either, and this is kind of another head scratcher for me. But unlike Trail Mix, this particular nonprofit gets all of their revenue from public money, which means that they should be considered a governmental nonprofit, which has a Fiscal Procedures Act and state law associated with it. It's almost exactly the same requirements as we have in their accounting. So they're really supposed to have public meetings and hold public hearings for their budget and jump through all the kind of hoops that we have to jump through. They haven't been doing that, and so that money really, in my opinion, hasn't been audited properly. And so, it's kind of like one of my first steps, I guess, is, moving into the auditor position is to say, you either need to comply with the state's non-governmental fiscal procedure, Nonprofit Fiscal Procedures Act, or we just need to bring these positions under the county. And, by far the easiest thing for them to do is just to bring the positions in under the county. The county has a state contract that pays all the costs for these two employees, and so it wouldn't affect the budget anywhere else in the county. But I was proposing because Elaine has been serving on the board of this nonprofit and more or less managing these employees anyway, so probably would place them as a department under the travel council. Yes.
Wait, Elaine's been doing what? Serving as on their board?
Yeah, and more or less managing.
Marion DeLay did too.
Yeah, and Marion, the nonprofit was established in the 70s, I guess back when the Welcome Center got going, and it was originally established, like, perhaps, almost certainly before the Travel Council was established. And if you read the kind of the purpose of the nonprofit, it sounds like the Travel Council as a regional promotional entity. But I think once the Travel Council really got going, that nonprofit just ended up serving as the administration for the Thompson Welcome Center. It ceased really to be a regional promoting entity. So, in my opinion, it's time to just do away with it and bring those employees into the county. The county has the contract with the state, and the contract says nothing about third-party, contracts or anything. And I did ask the state auditor, can we contract with a nonprofit for this? And he said yes, but blah, blah, blah. If that's their only revenue stream, they should be considered a governmental nonprofit. There's all these rules.
So, and I could be wrong, but I thought Elaine said in her budget that their budget takes care of part of the cost of the Thompson Welcome Center.
No, the money doesn't. The money gets brought in to the Travel Council's budget for the state contract, and then goes out of the Travel Council's budget as a check to this nonprofit.
Okay.
So it gets first brought in, and it gets accounted as revenue in the Travel Council, and it's also accounted as an expense leaving the Travel Council to go to this nonprofit. So what would happen instead is that, the revenue would come into the Travel Council as it always has, and then be expended in the Travel Council for these two employees. There was actually, some savings also for them when I reviewed their budget. They were spending about $6,000 a year for accounting and nonprofit reporting, board insurance, all this stuff that would go away, expenses that would go away if they were brought under the county. So that's the rationale for that. Just straightening things up and making sure that money is accounted for properly. It goes through the appropriate process since it's public money. Next up, IT assistant position, which includes IT stuff and I think GIS stuff too, right?
Yes, it's about half and half. It's not actually assistant.
Well,
It's a tech.
yeah. None of these, yeah, I haven't really assigned necessarily a real job name to it yet, but.
Well, there has been a job description approved.
Oh, I have that.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the name of
I
it?
think it's IT and GIS technician.
So Chris, are the IT and HR positions here, are they in the proposed salary adjustment? These are the two that are.
I haven't put them in yet.
None of the 2019 new proposed positions are in the 2019 budget, right?
In the salary adjustment.
The only ones that I've plugged in so far is for the jail.
For the 2018.
For 2019, I plugged in the jail as proposed.
And the OSTA increases already in there too.
Yeah,
So
the
as far as
OSTA.
additional cost of the general fund that we haven't looked at yet, these are the two. Yeah.
Yeah, and so IT, GIS technician, Matt said around 75, or I mean, around 50 a year, I think he said. And so the full cost would be, close to 75,000 a year for this position. And then I just also made the note, I haven't talked with Matt about it yet, but where would we put the person?
Oh, right. I think he would just make it happen in his office. He has a high school intern every quarter, and he makes room for them. So, I mean, it's not ideal, but you saw what the building department has done and the community development department. But they'll find a way. I will say that the expenses that it'll take care of, though, we did have a third-party contract for doing help desk and monitoring of our server, and that was, I think, $20,000 a year.
Well, I think it was like 28, but not all of that would be offset by this position. So I think that it was about 20,000 that would get offset.
Okay.
Hypothetically, anyway.
But then we're also spending money on GIS work.
Well, we have the GIS system already in place, and we're paying for that. And so, but we aren't really doing anything with it as far as I know.
Oh, no, we are.
What are we doing?
Oh, yeah, so we have a GIS policy committee that meets every quarter. I mean, it's a slow process, but.
But I mean, what work is getting done?
All kinds of things are getting done.
No, I mean, like, what actual product is being created?
Well, we actually have a working product. We're working with the AGRC of the state. We're trying to refine some road center line data where, I mean, there's a lot. There's building footprints we've got going on. There's addressing we're looking at. We have lots of technical committees.
So is the concept that this person will be doing the GIS work for departments in the county?
I believe that's right. I'd have to look at the job description again. It's been a year since I looked at it, but there would be a lot of technical fine-tuning of the data, I guess you could say, would be part of the job. And another part of the job, of course, more IT related that, where Matt is a department of one and he's covering everything from, your $20 an hour stuff to your high-level strategizing stuff. So it would make better use of the director's time.
Well, I'm just wondering if it would truly offset work that's being done right now. I mean, part of the rationale, I think, for getting the enterprise system was to get several people across the county trained on GIS so they can do their own GIS
work. We have the
work.
road department set up, the development department set up, the sheriff's office. I mean, we do have a pretty darn good start on our GIS enterprise system, I would say. So we have to keep paying their licensure. But it's worth it, otherwise.
I guess what I'm saying is I wouldn't necessarily bank on this offsetting the costs associated with people who are already engaged in GIS. I think if anything, the GIS work is going to increase as we get more and more set up for it and everybody getting trained. And so I don't think it will probably offset expenses in GIS. I doubt it will.
No, but I think there's IT demands that we hear again and again, and I think Matt is getting crushed. And
Well, I definitely think that it's needed. It's just a matter of, you know, if we can afford it, obviously it's adds 75,000 to the deficit we're already working with.
Yeah.
But, you know, I guess if we can hire somebody and they're willing to work down there in that room with Matt, you know, then to me, like, if I were a professional and they were like, this is going to be your office, I'd be like, oh, man, I don't know. But,
Chris, do you think that the Thompson Welcome Sprint Center, do you think we could give that to CNHA somehow and make them?
no, I don't think so. They're already trying to offload. They're getting out of that business. So, I mean, that's the reason why we're taking trail mix on us, because they are not going to cover the county's employees anymore. So,
Mainly
And
because of health insurance costs.
completely seriously, I've got room for at least one person in that list.
We'll give you two.
Honestly, we could
You've got room for
probably
one.
do it.
so I mean, I do think that we would have to assess, you know, scenarios like that if we are to bring people on. In the absence of any new office space, I mean, we should be looking at. I mean, if you look at for instance, you know, where I'm working in the clerk's office, we're really cramped packed in there. But go over to the recorder's office and it's very open and airy. You know, it's like, so, I mean, there's a degree of shuffling around that could happen, and there's a degree of making use of some of the space we have more efficiently, in my opinion. But I don't know how the negotiations like that kind of stuff would go, considering that some of it is other elected officials.
Yeah.
Well, and if some money was put into getting rid of the vault I don't need, and I've got these two huge vaults, we don't need them.
Can we put people
I
in
don't
them?
have bundles of cash I'm storing in there. And we used to keep, you know, a whole bunch of old tax roll books, but we've digitized all that, got it all in microfilm, we shipped all those books up to the state archive. So, you know, frankly, they could tear those out and put in an office that would easily house HR and another person, freeing up that other office up there. But it would take some money. I mean, you'd have to do a little bit of remodel work there. But
And I expect, you know, when we do our needs analysis, that these are kind of things that will be incorporated into it. Hopefully, is that not only, you know, like, what are our space needs, but, you know, what capacity do we have to remodel, to gain that space, etc. So, something to think about, but I mean, I suppose we could just move forward on, you know, putting this position with the proposed budget and figuring it out, you know.
Yeah, I would like to see this position included in the proposal. I'm not sure about the HR one yet, though.
See, so moving forward, John already asked me to remove that from the list, so.
Done.
All right. I like that.
So when we just talked about
The ones that I would say are the big question marks for me are the ITGIS technician, the social media position in the travel council. I mean, I don't really necessarily care, you know, what about this social media position, because in order for them to afford to pay this person, they're just going to have to reduce their advertising budget by the same amount.
in this day and age, you know, that social media position might be worth more than a billboard somewhere.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't have a problem with moving forward with that one. It's not going to affect the general fund. It's not going to cause us to have to raise revenue or anything. We'll just have to amend travel council's budget to, you know, take some money out of their advertising line item and put it into a position. So, you know, I guess the council would, you know, if the council wants a social media position, I don't think they should be thinking about it like, can we afford it? We should be thinking about it, do you want it?
position, we're gonna take money away from the advertising.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, their whole department is from advertising, I mean, from promotional TRT, yeah.
Yeah, they understand that their budget's self-contained, so, yeah, I don't really have any issues with it. And then with IT, I know that's a little harder pill to swallow because, we can't use tourism taxes to pay that for that position. That's gotta come from the general fund. And it can't be offset by TRT, it can't be offset by TRCC. It's just gotta be a full-on general fund contribution. So, which is where we're having trouble, obviously with revenue. But I agree that it's needed. I think that it is needed.
Yeah.
Did the assistant manager of the HOSTA, did that be used?
Yeah, TRCC can go into offsetting expenses at HOSTA, and it is. And so, like I said, this is not really a new position, it's a reclassification of a position, but it does come with, $1 or $2 or whatever increase in the market value of the position. So, going from the lead tech to this assistant manager, it does carry, some marginal increase in cost because of the market value of that is higher. But that's not something I'm really worried about either. I'm more concerned really, about the IT position just because it's going to add to the deficit that we're running or projecting on the general fund. These ones, we've got, like I said, we're sitting without the salary increases applied to the B-Roads fund. I think we were sitting around $408,000 in revenue over expenses, and so if you account for both trail mix and the salary adjustments for all of the roads department employees, we're still talking about $300,000 in revenue over expense. And so that's not one that I'm really all that concerned about either.
I like having these positions, or I'm willing to take these positions on because I don't want them lost in the community, and it seems like they're out of other options. I would want to be sure that we're getting them in at the appropriate grade too. I don't know if that was just something that, do you know what they're currently making? I know right now they don't have benefits, so.
You mean the trail mix?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're part-time, so this is pretty close to, it's a little more than what they're currently making. By maybe 50 cents or something like that an hour.
But that, offering them benefits is a considerable compensation compared to what they're getting.
The benefits cost is large. So if you can see, for instance, with the manager, salary is $44,762, benefits are $20,513. So it's a pretty sizable cost relative to the salary.
And there wasn't any kind of market data for the manager or coordinator?
There was. We got some. I mean, it wasn't super extensive. I think maybe we had 5 or 6 data points, for these positions that we dug up. And that was relayed to Zachariah, and so that's how he came up with the proposed grades. And so these proposed salaries are, relatable to the grade that Zachariah recommended based on the market data, and then, the time that these people have been working in these positions, which isn't it's not a long time. I think we're only talking like step 2, maybe step 3, but they have been in the positions for a while. But that's the proposal, and it's pretty close to what they're currently making.
I didn't realize they were currently making different rates.
They are, yeah.
So do we need a motion? Or is this just for discussion only?
Well, it'd be good probably to have a motion to either approve as presented, or if we have further amendments that we want to make to this list.
Did you remove the HR off there? Okay. I would make a motion to use the proposed positions for 2019 as a planning document for budgetary purposes. Yeah.
A second.
Any more discussion on this?
This is council, and then president hearing, president board,
Just budget. And then when this gets to the council, when I present it to the council in November, that will be your budget, and you guys will make the calls.
Yeah. But now we don't have to go through all the discussions again, because we did it today.
But part of the reason.
That's the theory.
The council here is so that you get the input and we're not hearing from anyone that we don't like what you're doing. Because we don't want to put stuff in the budget we send to you.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, so if there's discussion, you know, if this proposal's off the mark, we'd rather wrestle with it now than in December. Yeah.
Okay.
So clarifying, so the only change that's been made to what was presented originally is HR assistant being removed.
That's right.
Nothing has changed. Okay. So I'm going to put that into the motion too, if that's okay.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye.
How many do we have then? So this
Carries
is budget
4-0.
board?
Yeah. Yeah, 4.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I make a motion to move discussion item D1 up?
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Motion passes to move discussion item B forward on the agenda. Go ahead, Chris.
Can we pull up the,
Oh, yeah.
okay, so the, as you've been hearing, the state auditor's office is, I don't want to say cracking down on the counties, but they are taking a closer look at counties. They have the statutory authority to do that, and to consult with the counties on their internal controls. It was definitely brought to a head by problems in Kane County with the treasurer there embezzling money. And they are doing a systematic review of the counties, their internal controls, and they've come up with the idea of producing a report. Last I heard, it was going to be a report where all the counties are included in one big report, and every county is going to get a score. And your score is going to indicate your risk of undetected fraud and abuse in the county. So they're not saying you do have fraud and abuse, but they're saying what is your risk that it's happening and you haven't found out about it. Because that's what was happening in Kane County. They were doing their external audits, they were doing a lot of stuff, but no one was catching this problem of the embezzlement.
And sorry, Chris, this is separate from the TRT audit?
Totally separate,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
completely different.
All right, I'm with you.
Is it time to get back a little bit like what that workshop was?
Yeah, oh yes, this is exactly the same thing, yeah. Yeah, so this is the scale that they're gonna use on that report. You're either gonna come out very low, moderate, high, or very high on your risk of undetected fraud and abuse. Your, where you land on that scale is gonna depend on how many points you accumulate for these different items here. And the state auditor's office is doing, I think, a really good job of laying out exactly what they want. They've produced a whole raft of documents explaining what they expect to see for each of these individual things, even going as far as to produce resolutions that you can basically replace, put your entity name here and pass to get, for instance, an ethical behavior policy in place. So, we don't have to do so much of figuring out how to do this, but it's more a matter at this point of implementing it. And the ones I really want to focus on, and the reason I brought it before the Budget Advisory Board, is that it's probably going to require some amount of expenditure from the county. And so I'll explain where that's coming from. Mostly it's coming from the top 3 items, which are also the highest point value items, which are the internal audit function, fraud hotline, and the audit committee. despite having a county auditor, the county auditor's office doing internal audits does not count for these points here because the auditor is considered part of the management of the county and is intimately involved with doing everything. So, and it's also different from what your external auditor does because if you read the external audit report, they say we're not really evaluating your internal controls. We're making sure that what's on your books comports with what's in the bank and what's in reality. But they're not really taking a look at how well are you doing with your internal controls. And when I say internal controls, that's the system you have in place to make sure that there aren't not only fraud and embezzlement, but also just plain mistakes and things being put where they shouldn't be. So we also, the Budget Advisory Board, when it was passed earlier this year, has an audit function included in it. But because the Budget Advisory Board is has members that are part of management, that also is not going to count for the internal audit function. It's also not going to count for the audit committee function.
Well, it's not supposed to, yeah. When Jeremy Walker came down, I think he may have met with some of the council members also. He came over to the Clerk Auditors Convention, which also has to be going at the same time, and outlined, what this audit committee is supposed to look like and these audit internal controls, and made it pretty clear that, like the clerk auditor, the treasurer, they don't want us to be on this audit committee because, we're part of the management. So, but their ideal audit committee, they acknowledged was very difficult to come up with, especially in a rural community. And, he did say that in some cases, management is on audit committees, and that's better than not having an audit committee at all. But ideally, they wouldn't be on it. Ideally, it would be essentially sort of volunteers, really qualified, highly qualified volunteers.
So,
and so it's like, well, I don't know how we're going to end up getting that, but that is what they asked for, and they're not really looking for this board to function as the audit committee.
Right. So the documents that they put out outlining the audit committee, their recommendation is to have it consist of county council members. Less than a quorum would be the audit committee. If those council members don't have the requisite knowledge and financial expertise, then they need to get it with an advisor. And that may be where some of the expense comes in. If you hire a outside CPA organization to have a person come in and meet with that audit committee and provide that expertise, that's going to count and we'll get those points. One way we can avoid that expense is if we find someone from another government agency with that kind of financial expertise who's willing to come and attend a few meetings to help those council members who are on the audit committee with their duties. The other place where the expense comes in, and I asked Jeremy straight up, told him what our audit committee, how the budget board is, and he said we wouldn't get the points as it currently stands. So the audit committee would be tasked with appointing an internal auditor who would do the internal audit function. And the clarification I got from Jeremy is that it's hard to imagine how we would swing that without hiring an outside CPA firm to do that internal audit work. And he said that it should only be a few days a year to the audit committee would set up the work program, say, here's our highest risk areas. We want a test to be done on these areas for internal controls. You set up a work product, you have the CPA come in and do it, and then you're good on the internal audit function. And so I'm asking, A, that we create a budget for the audit committee, and B, that we put in $5,000 to $10,000 for that. I haven't put this, gone out to CPAs to say, but that's just based on conversations directly with Jeremy about how much he thinks we might need. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other issue also is just that, like private sector CPAs and those that are qualified for government accounting are usually not the same type of CPA. And so government CPAs are kind of specialized, and but there are, they exist in the region. There are some in Price, although they've gone to work for the government already.
And they're putting out a list of CPAs that will honor the state contract amounts and stuff like that.
So yeah, I mean, it's kind of doubtful that we would find anybody that lived literally in Grant County, but if it's only a few days, that we need them, then I'm sure we can get them here.
Right. That's the idea. And then the fraud hotline, you would also advertise to the county employees that if you see anything hanky going on, that you can call this number or send an email to this address, and it's going to get dealt with. So those would be also going to most likely that outside firm, and that they would bring that to the audit committee, who would and then there would be a decision on how to move forward. And there would also be a process in place of how these kind of complaints are dealt with. And more than actually finding a lot of things through the hotline, just having the hotline at all is a deterrent, and one of the reasons that it scores so many points.
Well, one of the things that was interesting also from the Clerk Auditors Convention was that Utah County had created an internal control department, and these were literally employees that they hired. And they had initially outlined, a process that they were going to go department by department, reviewing the internal controls, where they said once they established their fraud hotline, they haven't even started on their strategy for moving through the departments. They've just been putting out fires for 2 or 3 years in terms of work, prioritizing immediate issues.
People use the hotline.
Well, it wasn't just the hotline. I mean, there were other elements, but they also said that they did have to deal with a lot of politically or just malicious kind of stuff with the hotline, where people are trying to get other people in trouble for not good reasons. But for the most part, though, that they did deal with a lot of stuff. But I just thought it was interesting that they hadn't even started on their work plan yet. They were just putting out fires, and they had been working on doing that for a couple of years. And so, it's hard to say exactly what will pop up when you just open the door to these kind of things, but regardless, I think it's, important and a good idea. And so, just keep that in mind, that the experience that other counties have, although they're much, much bigger than us, is that, there could be quite a bit of work associated with an internal control committee and audit committee.
And what are the penalties of the ratings? Is it just shame on you?
Yeah,
Shame. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's going to be in a report that's going to be on a website that anyone can look up.
Lower the public's trust.
We're going to be compared with every other county. So the only points that we can't get are qualified staff, CPA degree in accounting, easily, I would say. Nobody, to my knowledge, in the county has that.
We used to have.
Not something you can get
Who had it?
Sure thing.
quickly
Sure
and
thing.
easily. So that takes us, from a total of 175, that puts us at a starting point if we get everything else of 155. So I think we can still get a very low rating if we, follow through with pretty much everything.
Wait, if we got the top 3 in place.
The top 3 and some of the other ones. We already have some of them. We have a purchasing policy. We have
Sure.
Personally, there's some of these we
A
have.
lot of these closed.
Correct. Yeah, there's just a few.
They need to be updated, but we do have them.
And-
That's on the list of.
I was really surprised
strategies
when I
for
did
us
the
all.
training that having elected and non-elected employees do an ethical yearly daily attendance, and that doesn't cost any money. Wow.
The only other one that we can't, guarantee is going to happen is board members complete the state auditors training. We can't force the council members to do it, I don't think, but we can
I did
highly
it.
recommend it.
That's the one we did.
I think we did it. Didn't we all do it?
I did it last week.
All right, we got
So
three of
the
us.
next,
It's an annual thing, though.
No, you do it online.
Yeah.
Ruth sent us an email, or somebody did.
Well, you can do it, I think you can do it online or that face-to-face where Jeremy Wilkers, I think. Was he having?
The pizza party?
Down recently.
yeah,
Was that considered his training or was that more of an orientation?
I don't know. Was it?
I got a certificate from going to that
Oh, okay.
that said, aboard training.
They just go on the training.
So the next issue is sort of the timing issue. The clerk auditor's office just received a letter requesting that we send them more information before they get ready to come and make their site visits, and they need that information by the end of the month. Jeremy indicated to me he hopes to have all their site visits done by the end of the year. So I would expect this report to be coming out early next year.
Is that the TRT? Is that the TRT audit you're referring to?
No,
Or this one,
this
the
one.
same one, okay.
Yeah. I don't know that we have time to get all these policies in place and through legal review and passed by the council before they come. We don't know where we're going to be in line for that. But I think if we have policies drafted and in legal review or in process, that's probably going to...
Well, we might be able to,
Let's just put Chris's number for the hotline.
we might be able to establish, or, at least start on getting a committee and an internal audit function underway. And maybe even if the council approved the committee, but hadn't quite fully filled out the membership of it, you might be able to get some credit for that, Because initially, when Chris and I had filled that form out, we said, yes, we have an audit committee, it's the budget advisory board, it's written in there, but that doesn't qualify, so.
So another question is, do we leave the audit requirements in the budget advisory board? And right now, having seen the amount of work that the budget advisory board has to do and looking forward to a capital projects plan and, all these other things that are still on our to-do list, not even touching that, my initial inclination is to remove that function from the budget advisory board into the audit committee and not have it in two places. But
Well, it sounds like it doesn't count anyway to have it in this.
So take it out of the resolution.
right, it's not going to count for them. I mean, looking at different departments, it could still be useful from an internal standpoint. But I'm not sure that the budget advisory board is going to have the time to put it.
Well, yeah, and in a lot of cases, for almost entirely, most of this is really the legislative or executive body exercising their authority to initiate audit reviews to build this up. And I think the state auditor really is looking for a committee that's separate from the regular financial element of accounting.
Yeah.
So it kind of falls on the council to get this up and running. Because if Chris and I were heavily involved in it, it would be sort of conflict against the principle of the thing. But the timing is pretty short at this point. I mean, we should get going on it, or the council should get going on trying to fill in the gaps on this as soon as possible, so that hopefully by the time the report comes out, we won't have missed all the top points or whatever.
So the first step would just be forming an audit committee? Or what's step
I would
one?
say so, and then that audit committee would begin to fill out the internal audit function. I think you can do a hotline anytime, really. I mean,
Well, it sounds like they want the hotline to go to somebody outside.
The hotline has to have a place to go, and you need
Yeah.
to have procedures in place for what happens with it. And they've laid all that out. They've given us all the documents for how they'd like to see that.
does it have to be a live person to answer the phone or a message service?
I think there's some flexibility in that area. Like you can set up an email too. I mean, but we can look through it together. Like I said, they produced a lot of information on this, and I've read through it. And it's just a matter. I don't think it would be a conflict for management to draft some of this stuff, especially since we're working off of the templates that they came up with. And get it going. And part of the reason we're bringing this up is just so that the council knows to expect to see this coming through soon and why you're seeing it and what's behind it, and also to hopefully get a little money to back it up so that we are covering ourselves on the financial expertise.
Do you need a resolution from the audit committee to the audit?
I think you
It-
do. I would
it
follow
has-
my resolution.
It has to be formed by resolution to get your voice.
So, right,
I've already started kind of, working with the state auditor's template and putting in Grant County, and I'm kind of hoping to combine some of these other things in there so that we're not passing too many separate things.
Are you ready by the first council meeting in November, or are you thinking, or?
I think we ought to get moving as
Or next
quickly
week.
as possible.
Next week or November?
No, I mean, the council's not going to be approving it, right? It's got to go through legal review, doesn't it?
Not necessarily, but
We can-
I mean,
Yeah.
if it's coming from a sort of a boilerplate that's been provided by them, it's less, necessary to pass it through. I mean, if we, at this point, quite honestly, if we put something into the attorney's office, we might never get it back out.
Easy,
Until next year.
It depends on what it is.
What I'm asking is, do we want to really have it ready for this next Tuesday, week from today, or are we looking more realistically to think about it as the first meeting in November? So I'm asking which would be the.
I would say the first meeting in November. Yeah, there's no way they're going to be here because they don't. Our documents aren't due to them till the end of the month, so I think we're totally safe there.
That makes sense, for the first meeting in November.
Yeah. And I'll have my tax bills out by then, and my life will be a little bit more free
Okay,
then.
and so for the audit committee,
I don't think we have to redo the budget committee as our first priority. It doesn't matter if there's that other stuff hanging out there. But yeah, form the audit committee. We may, I'm not sure how many different things we're going to be asking you to pass. They've created a whole bunch of charters and all sorts of stuff for this. I'm hoping to consolidate some of it so that the audit committee sort of also lays out the internal audit function and what the hotline does, because they're all of a piece together, and I think we can put that all together.
so that looks like that will be
Yeah.
brought forward by October.
Yeah.
7th.
But, the ethical behavior policy and, annual ethics pledge, I'm still on the fence there as to, whether we need to pass a separate item for those, whether we can just institute I'm not 100% sure on those. I've spent most of my time on the top.
Isn't there something that the elected officials sign that's an ethics thing?
Yeah, you do
I have some vague recollection.
Yeah.
I think the difference here is we do that when we're elected, and then it's filed away, we never look at it again.
It's the annual.
Supposed to do it in.
Yeah.
So it would just be a process. I think almost everybody has a ethical pledge to have this time to get hired.
Right, and there's stuff in the employee handbook that,
So
more or
it would
less,
just be having everybody do it yearly.
yeah, it's the annual part that they,
So for today, we probably need to make a motion to put some money into the budget for this.
So what'd you say, 10,000? About 10,000?
Yeah.
Out of your budget?
well, here's a proposal to make it revenue neutral for the general fund. The Sandflats hasn't increased its contribution to the administrative expenses for the county for years and years, and I talked to Andrea after her presentation, and she thought it would be okay to increase it, so.
So take it out of
10,000?
It's just
He's
one-
just saying to increase the contribution to the general fund for the administration that the clerk and treasurer do in managing.
And I can tell you the volume of
Sandflats
cash
fund.
that comes through from Sandflats is large and increasing.
Yeah,
And-
well, yeah,
I
I mean,
think
the staff
that's-
over in the clerk auditor's office, has to count their money every day and put it in the vault and transfer it. I mean, there's quite a bit of work that happens.
And there's direct fees on actually depositing that cash and depositing all their checks in our bank fees.
That sounds appropriate.
All right.
Is that, enough? Do we need to?
Well, it was 5,000, so if we doubled it, it would be an increase of 5,000.
No, I meant for all this added, if we haven't adjusted any kind of, fees for sand flats, is that, like, are you really getting bogged down by working for sand flats?
Not bogged down, but because they're an enterprise fund, they're supposed to really pay all their own expenses.
Yeah, I know,
So,
that's,
it's, I mean, we can cover the work. It's just, a matter of, I guess, getting compensated for, having the general fund compensated for doing that work.
And that's probably
But, I mean,
something
I don't
that needs to
know.
be worked out, but for today, we do need to.
So, I guess what
So is
department
that-
though, let's just talk first about where the expense would come out of.
I think you ought to create an audit committee
I mean, I guess
on
part of my concept of this is that it's sort of the responsibility of the legislative body.
Sure, it could be a sub-department of the council.
And so, I mean, I almost see it as being a council
That's a good idea.
expense.
Yeah.
yeah, especially if the state auditor kind of tasks the council as being.
Mr. Chair, we're going to be having to change the county council budget for 2018 anyway to cover all these travel expenses that were not budgeted for, potentially. And so we might be able to do that this next meeting, having that.
So, I think if we're gonna, well, I don't know if we have to expend any money this year for this, do we?
Well, if we need to bring in an outside,
Well, is it
It
gonna
depends on-
start in January? or
It
is
depends on
gonna
how
start?
quickly things move and when the first meeting is scheduled and.
I mean, if the very first even council agenda items in the beginning of November, I
no,
mean, and then, I just have a hard time believing that anything's really going to start up until next year. But
I don't anticipate any expenditures for this year, no.
could it all fall under professional services, or would you like it to have its own?
Well, at this point, I mean, I might just make a new line item for it, but I can put it in as a placeholder, just using, contribution to other blah, blah, blah.
There we go.
This software, you can't create line items in this software. You have to do it in Cassell, and then reload everything over here to get it to show up. But I would recommend, if we're going to budget for that, to put it in the council's budget. Like I say, it's sort of a legislative body responsibility.
So moved.
Well, and this is a discussion item, so
Oh,
Yeah,
you can't move it. but
we
you
gotta
can
get this
still-
on the agenda for next time, so,
okay.
Well,
Okay.
Head nods.
yes.
so I'm just going to make a note then.
I'm just
How
gonna
much-
do it anyway.
Well, I'm
Just
putting it
kidding.
in. I'm putting it in the notes, but
Yeah.
I mean, there's no. This is all tentative anyway.
Yeah.
There's no actual decision made on the budget until the council passes it.
Yeah.
So, but I will make note of it. 10,000.
And I apologize, I'm gonna have to leave in a few minutes. Is it all right with everyone if I make a few comments on the next item?
Are we done with this one?
Yes, please
All right,
do.
let's move on then to action item 2B, truth and taxation.
My first comment is that we've got a lot of moving pieces here, and I think maybe it would be useful for everyone to start a brand new spreadsheet up here. Start with our deficit where it's at and plug in some of these moving pieces so that they can be moved around to see different scenarios if people want to see them. And some
Like
of the-
right now, you want me to do that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. You start with our deficit here, and we talk about the different moving pieces that could increase it or decrease it, and we,
All right.
Okay, that's a good idea.
because I'm losing the ability to hold them in my mind. There's too many of them.
So let me
My mind
pull
is 4 years on here, so-
where we're at with the. Well, do you want me to incorporate the changes though to the? I mean, it's really hard for me to plug
Those
in.
weak I am.
Well, I'll just have to do it manually. Hold on. So at this point where we're at with various changes that have been made without salary adjustment, we're only 6,800, 6849. I'll plug that in. That's the current,
Right.
without salary.
Right, so
Without
we
salary.
start there, we put in the salary increase, we put in the new position that affects the general fund. The stormwater should be in there.
stormwater's already got 100,000 going to it, so
Right.
unless we change that, I won't have to make an adjustment to this number.
And does it have the 238? Didn't you mention a 238 number?
There's two, that's already in the budget too.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Without making any changes.
So, hold on, let me just get caught real fast. So then I gotta go into this position-based reporting. And general fund. So we're looking at,
While Chris works on that, since Curtis isn't here, I'll do a little bit of the plug against property tax increase. But I want to say first that I'm very biased on this subject because of my position. What I do every day is putting myself in the taxpayer's shoes and trying to figure out how to best serve them. And I deal with those folks who come in to get abatements for their property tax for the people who make just a little bit too much. Just they make $33,000 a year and they don't qualify for any help. And so, I see firsthand the folks who are really struggling with it. So I don't think that I can really bring a real objective opinion on it. I've tried, and I don't think I can get there that easily. So for me, I think I definitely have a bias towards not doing a property tax increase until it's the last option available. And the way I view things so far, it doesn't seem to me like we're at the last option available this year. I hear the concerns about just kicking the can down the road, but I do feel like there are some things in place that over the next year are going to make a difference. One of them is the Budget Advisory Board. I feel like there's a better handle on where we're at. I think that's going to continue to improve to next year. We've got the needs assessment that's going to be happening that may clarify some things. I think the Budget Advisory Board is going to have time to work on a capital needs project assessment and sort of get some of those things in place. As I was thinking about today, and are we really going to sit down and come up with a number for what's needed? There were great big unknowns in there for me, like capital projects, like what really needs to be put into stormwater mitigation to actually fix the problems over a time period that's reasonable. And then also potential other funding sources. Obviously, we've talked about having other entities help with the subsidies that are needed for solid waste and EMS and the care center and some of these other areas where a lot of money is going toward. Like Chris said, there's a lot of different ways to couch, why we're thinking about a property tax increase, why there's a deficit. Obviously, the salary adjustment is sort of the new thing that's there. But the reason the county can't afford the salary adjustment is because of all the other places money is going. So, there's a lot of different ways to think about it. I already brought up the idea of putting it before the voters, whether they want to. Maybe it doesn't cover all of a property tax increase, but it could certainly reduce it significantly to increase the rural health care and sales tax. And you could do that in a way where you advertise for truth in taxation, you put the sales tax on the ballot, and by the time you have to pass a budget, you're going to know whether or not the sales tax passed. You would have had to, you would have to advertise truth in taxation, for sure, next year in that scenario. And if you looked at the document that I sent out from the state, while Grand County's tax rate compared to other counties is the 8th lowest in 2017, and that was the average tax rate across all the entities, I believe. When you start looking at what that translates to because of our high property values, we come up towards the higher end on what people are actually paying. I know that I'm collecting, I don't have the number yet, but it's more than $2 million increase in the amount of taxes being collected this year versus last year. Part of that's new growth, but it's not the most significant part. Most of it is from tax increases. So tax increases are happening, even though the county hasn't done one in a long time, and they're going to continue as well. We've got other entities that are looking at doing it. The school board already has one baked in for the next couple of years. And when we're balancing all those things versus we're going to kind of see here where that comes to, but maybe 10 to 20% draw off of the general fund balance, and maybe when we add all these fund balances together, maybe it's even a little less than that. To me, that doesn't come out as being financially irresponsible in order to buy more time to come up with the right number for the property tax increase if it has to happen. But again, I definitely am biased on this one, and definitely leave it to the council to, take the higher view of it and take into consideration all the other needs that are coming up.
So one thing you're saying, if I understand correctly, is that one reason you feel this is premature is that we don't have all the information on what we would truly need.
Well, and there's always unknowns, right? And so, next year, is everything going to be crystal clear? It's not. But I think there's some things that are much clearer this year than they were last year. We have that needs assessment going forward. The Budget Advisory Board is going to have time between now and when we have to get serious about the next budget cycle to work on some of these other things.
So what you're saying is that you do not feel that it would be irresponsible for 1 year to draw from the general fund to cover items while we clarify other issues.
It doesn't seem to me to be just based on the percentage of the overall savings that would take out. I mean, if you decide to do a big stormwater thing and add all this other stuff, that might get bigger and bigger. It depends on what you do here with these different moving parts. But from what we've talked about so far, maybe a 10 to 20% draw for 1 year.
So I would say, here's the total deficit. I'd say 400,000 of that is probably contingency that most likely won't get spent.
And make sure that the new growth is on there too.
For the, oh, you mean like add in new growth to the revenue?
We know it's going to be there. I know we can't budget it for it, but when we're looking at what we would have to draw off the fund balance, it's money we won't have to draw off the fund balance.
So let's say, I'm going to say, but there's 400,000 in contingency. How much in new growth?
I don't think it would be unreasonable to say 100,000. It was 125 to the county this year. I think it was.
So for the general fund specifically, and this is, with 238,000 going to capital projects, and only 100,000 going to stormwater. If we subtracted 500,000 from this deficit to account for contingency and new growth, we end up at 388, 389, which these are all very approximate, rough projections. That would be, where we're sitting. If we wanted, obviously if we made a real contribution to stormwater that would be enough to actually make a match for a project, we'd have to increase that by 300,000. You probably need about 400,000 to get a project match and move forward with it. But there's also the option, as we've taken in the past recently, to save up for it instead of just putting it all on the table all at once.
Thanks, Chris. Good summary.
So then we've got this amount in fund balance for TRT, TRC, CE. Like I say, these can go into offsetting that expense and it would cover it right there, but it wouldn't be something that you can continue to do on an ongoing basis. And then the general fund can always be drawn off of course, for any expense that the county has. the general fund capital, this, since we're budgeting out of this to take 238,000 from next year's revenue and put into capital projects, we could instead say we're going to take that same 238 out of this fund balance, which would reduce that deficit again by 238. Again, same issue with the rest of this fund balance draws, though, is it won't last forever. So this down here, this TRT offset, would be what we could maybe potentially gain back if the healthcare tax were increased to cover the full expenses that the healthcare special service district needed and EMS. Then what we could do is transfer the mineral lease money, or we could, transfer enough mineral lease money into EMS potentially to cover, transfer the expenses other than the rural health care tax out of both of those, move the money down into solid waste, and so we would reclaim, ultimately we could reclaim 404,000 in TRT by increasing the healthcare tax to fully cover EMS and the healthcare special services, or the healthcare special services. So that's how much we could reclaim in TRT. That's how much is going out. But that would require a ballot initiative and going, so it's too late to do that this year, obviously. So even if it passed, it won't go into effect until 2021.
If we put it on the ballot, is there a chance that the only thing that voters would be voting on would be increasing it? I mean, they couldn't just take the tax away on that same ballot, could they?
Vindication. No, they can't take it away, but the ballot initiative, I assume, would to increase it up to 1%. And it's too bad that they just didn't do that to begin with. But so that is one, I think that's one thing to think about. We can't use it for next year. It'd have to be, let's see. So 2019 was when we'd be able to run the ballot. 2020 would be when it would go into effect. So
it's too late.
It's not something we can count on for next year, but it is something that we can think about for next year. And I kind of doubt it would pass, but it's something to consider.
So if we do, if we were to do a, Band-Aid on the thing this year, then would that severely increase the amount that we'd have to come up with in a tax increase next year?
Well, you could eliminate it altogether just by band-aiding it. I mean, we could.
I understand that, but what I'm asking is, to put us back on par, what are we going to have to do next year if we put it off this year?
But I think, like I've said earlier, that it really more comes down to what we do, or what the council decides to do with operational space and stormwater. So if we were to, for instance, account for the real cost of those and get serious about stormwater and operational space for that property over there, those costs would be really, in my opinion, what a property tax would probably be about. I think that we can cover, like this deficit that we'd be left with, we might end up pulling that out of some of these fund balances. But our revenue from sales and use taxes, TRT, TRC, the growth in those will catch up either in 1 or 2 years and will be flush on that account. Of course, as the county gets busier, our expenses go up too, and so it's not a total net gain in growth. We always, go up in expenses every single year. Cost of doing business goes up. We're adding new positions to the roster, that are ongoing additional expenses. But for me, I think that the real issue at hand is, when does the county get serious about stormwater and operational space? That's my real question. And this is the kind of stuff that we've been doing since 2006, balancing the budget this way. And it's fine, it's the status quo, but we haven't made any real significant progress in operational space, even though that's been an issue for over a decade.
Well, the stormwater thing could really come back and bite the county in terms of, if we had a 100-year flood event or something like that, took its toll on half of the residential neighborhood,
Well, that's already happened, yeah. And it even happened this year or last year.
Yeah, but I mean, bigger time events happen.
Well, they had a 100-year rainfall out by Ring Village, didn't they?
So can you just throw in up here funding a stormwater project?
Yeah, so that's another
So we've got 100,000 in there.
300,000.
Probably would need another 300 to be able to, and this is just a match, this is not the
So
total
maybe
cost.
add a line below salary adjustment that specifies full project or something.
Stormwater. So if we said add another, to get to the point where we could
Yeah.
go to the CID,
Go there.
that'd be 300,000. So that, would bring up, this would be what I would think would be relatively close to what we'd have to draw out of some fund balance. And it could come from, these are the four main ones that we can draw from. TRT, TRCC, the general fund balance, and the general fund capital. So on the capital side, we could spend that whole amount next year, really. If we paid for all of, bills, equipment, and all the capital expenses, we could just drain that whole thing right out. But if we just did the ones that I'm budgeting to come out of the general fund, the roofs and the Oster projects and the carport, that would be 238,000 that this could contribute instead of next year's revenue, and that would drop that by 238.
So the roofs and the stuff that you just outlined are captured in the line 2 general deficit?
Yeah, although only one of those roofs, I think, is budgeted to come out of the general fund capital projects. And those costs may actually go down. I need to talk with Marvin to see what the actual costs are. So I'm thinking that if he's just going to do a fix as opposed to a full roof redo, and I don't know if that's the case with all of them, because there was 5 of them, I think, that he brought up. But
Still a good idea to budget for them just in case.
But I'm just saying that
Auditorium is bad.
I think only one of them has to come out of the general fund, and the other ones I budgeted out of TRCC and TRT. I budgeted the old senior center to come out of TRT because, and that's another thing I forgot to mention, is that 50,000 for the roof is already budgeted to come out of that. I already budgeted a draw from fund balance for that one. TRCC, I could do the same, I could budget those expenses also out of the fund balance. I think they're just coming out of the revenue right now. So yeah, in reality, if the budget advisory board and council wants to just say, let's soak up or balance the budget with fund balances, I could just start working on figuring that out. And what the most appropriate fund balance is to draw for each expense.
I think even if we sell those properties, any kind of new building for our space needs is going to be a lot.
I would not sell property.
Well, I'm hesitant to draw off the capital savings for other projects. I want to kind of grow that for something big and meaningful.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I certainly wouldn't sell county-owned real estate. You need a big down
What form?
The properties that we're talking about are in San Juan County. Yeah, we have some property down there that,
I mean, you can't build a county building down there, so, no, clearly.
yeah, it's the south end of the Moab Valley, but yeah,
But we have about 4 pieces of property.
There's- yeah.
We could sell this to,
So, yeah, that,
not probably.
that's a component.
Then I would go for that.
One missing piece is,
Basically, investment property in the
well, you know, one component of the expense that we aren't crystal clear on really is what it would cost to build out that area over there into new office space, in total. And, hopefully, I think with the needs assessment,
right.
we'll get a better idea of what that cost really would be.
What area are you referring to?
Just
The
adjacent to the
block.
courthouse here, the block that, you know, we've mostly obtained, but not entirely, and so. But if the process were to initiate, you know, I would assume that the title company would be interested in trading out, as they discussed, of the old library. But, you know, we've got to, if EMS is going to take over the old senior center, we've got to find a new place for Sam Flats, and, you know, we want, ultimately, when we make a decision for them, we want it to be a permanent kind of thing, you know, not just them getting bounced around all over the place.
I think San Flats actually and EMS are working together to where there would be space for them. They don't require that much for just their office part. That's always been in the plans, but I think San Flats is holding out for someday going back where they were with, you know, the changes that have been made at the top of BLM.
Yeah, but there's, that's just, I mean, I was in a BLM meeting last week, and that came up. There's no office space there.
No.
There.
Not currently,
No,
there's
it would-
land there though.
Yeah, it would,
Land, but, you know, the buildings are just storage.
Yeah, and one of those is a San Flats storage building. There's land though, but I believe the BLM requires that they have BLM staff in that office, and that's why they had to.
Yeah, I mean,
the
some
black and white
people
law.
think that,
I-
that it's not the most accurate interpretation of the law, but I don't think we can bank on the BLM for anything, but, I guess one of the questions I always have is, you know, what's the solid waste district's long-term plans for the recycling center? Well, I mean, at any,
The city take it over.
if the county is serious about it, you know, like, I don't know what our obligation is to continue that lease indefinitely, but,
There's not much you could build on there. I mean, Curtis keeps talking about affordable housing on that piece of property.
But that-
You can't build.
well, I bring it up, why can't you build it?
Because it's included, beach.
It's an old website.
So, you wouldn't be able to put like Sam Flats?
housing, you couldn't put housing.
But housing, you
But,
could do other things.
yeah.
We couldn't
Sand
do,
flats,
foundations. Like
Can't do
that.
foundation. Like, so let's say you were
You can't
gonna make
You can't
a,
build on top of the landfill, housing.
so would it wouldn't be, it couldn't be used
We
for
already have office.
building, like operational space for Sam Flats?
I believe it could.
Yeah, we could do that as long as the operation, yeah.
Well, every building requires a foundation by
Well,
law.
you know, you can't dig.
Put a temporary building.
Putting a slab on
For
the roof.
trailer or something.
Yes.
Well, you still gotta do footers to go into the
Well,
ground
yeah.
farm to
The type of buildings they have up there now can continue.
metal
But
buildings.
But to build permanent housing would involve reclaiming the land.
Well, I'm not talking about housing, I'm talking about,
Yeah.
like, provide, because I think the reason why Sam Flats wants to be where they were is because it's pretty convenient for them, you know? And the location of the recycling center is even more convenient.
Everything is,
And so I guess that's something else to consider in the long term, is that property is Grant County's, and so,
and you know, we have that old shooting range, which is a shame it's cost so much to clean up. So that's a prime piece of property. peeked at it just yesterday. What do you think?
It's gotta be more than that.
I don't know.
But, I would think that,
It's about, it's less than the size of this room. What they're using.
Could that not be handled by a trailer?
Yeah, I mean, that was their plan, is to have a modular.
They've got the money for modular, they're ready to go.
Need a-
Well, the space actually that the prior council already approved was that, where that first north house is, the old shoe house. But, I mean, Andrew just hasn't been in a hurry to do that.
higher class then.
Oh, I think so. I think so.
I don't know, I mean, I just feel like.
Well, some modulars, but they're not trailers.
Well, there are, I mean, we got trailers.
I think that the idea here though is that a big space needs to be a lot bigger.
I wouldn't do anything, occupied.
But I also, I'm for knowing how large the scope is. I don't want to start spending this.
Well, I would recommend not necessarily. Just TR2 and TR6. So hopefully, in the general fund, I think we're gonna be close enough to I guess the what I think is, and tomorrow, deadline for, so that's why I'm bringing this up. Told that we had, so,
You said some of that TRT was already going in.
so I guess I would. But on the other hand, maybe the one
We did get quotes for the roofs and they were that high.
for fixing them.
Replacement. That's the question.
I mean, one would say, I mean, you can put it in.
Towards your goal of figuring out how much we have in less for.
We're starting it.
don't have in here new proposed positions in the general fund. There weren't that many in the general fund. And did you want to plug in the 250 minimum for the taxiway? Well, it didn't help any last year when I brought it up, even though council wanted it. Didn't make it into the budget. There it is. That's too fast. Keep in mind the airport is going to constantly. It just is. It's not just that. Yeah. Depends. I mean, if you want it as an economic driver and you want to have a bigger terminal and even bigger planes, the 50-seaters are going to be phased out just like those 30-seaters were in no time.
And there's going to be continual public demand for. So, anyway, I mentioned it. Draft up an agenda item for them. Well, the thing, the big unknown for me is what does a $500,000 tax increase translate to taxable house? So how much is going to affect the tax bill? Because I would prefer to go to the taxpayer and say, look, we've got these capital projects to do, we've got this capital project to do, it's going to cost us $1 million, $2 million, whatever it is. Go to them once instead of having to go to them every single year. So that's the missing piece for me. That would be good information. Then I'm in agreement
the situation we're in now, because I can see the need to try and take care of the current needs that are on because of all the parts we need to see. The space. Just need to be able to gather all of that, five-year plan.
You guys are kind of shoo-in. But, I'm trying, I'm working really hard to not balance that. For me, I think the job's not hard. But then but I would rather fill it out. Christopher's point of view, new work, needs capital improvement things that so that we have a better idea of how much we really need to ask for. I don't know if we have to go much. That's a non-personal. I feel I'm not a good person to ask.
Besides that, but, the reality of this world is exactly the opposite. Strategy, build, there's some great for us. We did the calculation of the tax rate. So, the strategy is school district employees, basically broken down. And that's, they got to have that whole strategy. But we have that today. So, that, but it is actually at 3. So in order to make that effective, you can see the school district's capability of doing that is and the only way the county can do that is to fall what and a stormwater citizens that have negatively stormwater, safety, health, and trail mix. Trail mix is fundamental because that's what that all. Trail mix is but in terms of providing services,
You know, we don't right now, but we can even redo projects, even do.
Well, it's a matter of, this, my friend with Jackson, use our money, and so that,
You have to get money.
yes, and that's,
But we know what the projects are, then we can figure them out all the time over the next 30 years. You know, it's not like you're trying to solve any of this stuff. You, is that we have these continued developments, the continued developments really don't address the stormwater problem. There's a solution with that, when they do the development, and so then they come back to the county and say, you guys need to do something because we didn't put a treatment drain.
all right, so we gotta wrap this up, I'm sorry. But I guess what I'm at.
You go back to that spreadsheet that we just and we're saying that, you would, yeah, I'm hesitant to start. I guess I would like to see, even before her proposals are there, I'd be curious to see how much of a dollar increase that would be, how much yeah. Any question? Well, how about, can we get both those?
Yeah, do it good. 575.
Well, remember at this point, if you go do it from taxation, the number that you put in is maximum. And any amount below that.
So do we do all three of those? 1.5 million, 1 million, and 1 million? Great, that's no.
So, how's it? So I'll go and $1 million.
I think they use it.
Yeah, I would use 275.
I think it's gone up. I think Zachariah is gonna have that number. It's gone up significantly in the last year. But that's median, that's different than average. I think it is 360.
I don't think, you know, I'll try to figure out what that is. I think 250 was.
Well, what did that be required to advertise?
Well, it just said home. I don't know that you really have to have like,
Obviously, we don't go through pre-treatment. But I think we're at the point of the conversation where it's like, are we gonna advertise or are we not? We'll check stuff out. And I think that it's. The background of the restaurant was that's still pretty. We kind of got into some of the things that I was questioning. Our agreement, the city, and stuff. The quality. We were going. It sounds like they might be kind of go forward with
Cities locally.
that the city is.
Well, there's the USU is not on it.
Right, and so then I think the cities, there are some members in the city, but they're not the whole, they're part of the. Like Chris has said, we're already there with the cities. So I would think it's up to. I would think that we're making a project that happens, then how we get them to come back down.
I'm hearing, they want to, at this point, they want to step down. Why didn't it change? What's going on? Nine, or private donors, donated huge amounts, right? So that's what I'm getting, is they more or less want to move further with the discussion. That's what I've got.
I think the concerns that I heard as community road, and there's others that are actually having that road there, it's slides and those.
Well, we had a motion started, but I don't, you didn't,